All right, welcome back. Now, we want to have that conversation and just switch gears and have that conversation around cassava production in the country. How do we improve that value chain? This comes at a time when set to host the National Cassava Conference, that is Expo 2023, beginning tomorrow all the way to Thursday. Now, to help me with that conversation, I am joined by Dr. Morag Ferguson, who is a molecular breeder with the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. Dr. welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
All right, so first things first, just to help us understand how this sector is actually is currently doing at the moment, we want you to help us understand in terms of production of cassava in this country, how much cassava do we produce?
Okay, so if we look on a global scale, we'll see that there's about 300 million metric tons of cassava produced. Now, 65% of that is produced in Africa, but it's largely produced in Nigeria. Here in Kenya, we produce about 2 million metric tons, whereas in Uganda, they produce about double that, and in Tanzania, about 4 times that. So we are lagging behind a little bit in Kenya.
All right, because then the question that one might want to understand is, why are we lagging behind? What is it that we don't have? Because at the same time, we have a lot of land that lays bare in this country.
I think part of the issue is that people don't really understand the investment opportunities in cassava. So cassava is very much grown as a traditional staple crop and used piecemeal on the farm, but the real industrial applications are not really recognized in Kenya.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that when you look back at the history of Kenya, particularly as far as Kenyan farmers go, the farming of cassava is not a new concept in this country. So from the research that you have been conducting, why has this been reducing over time?
So as I said, cassava has very much been used just as a traditional crop when maize is not available. But cassava has enormous potential to be used both as a flour. A high quality cassava flour can be used as wheat flour in bread up to like 20%, both in bread and cookies and confectionery industry. So that is a huge market, and it would also mean that Kenya doesn't have to rely so much on the imports of wheat.
Yeah, and so again, just to engage you further, is the question of, when you look at the wheat requirements in the country and the fact that we ideally rely on very particular product, yet here you are telling me that we can also tap into cassava to be able to get the same wheat that we are looking for. But the question is that, of course, for a lot of farmers, there is an economical aspect to cassava farming, and to some of them, maybe the argument would be that we don't see the value that we would want to get out of cassava farming.
Yes, that's true at the moment, but that's because we're not using the cassava how we should be using it, and we're not exploiting its industrial potential. Not only can it be used as a flour in the baking industry, but it can also be used as an important source of starch. Yeah. It's the third most important source of starch globally, and there's a tremendous market for starch globally. It can also be used to make products such as these. These are biodegradable packaging as an alternative to plastics. And as we move into the modern era, we have to move away from these plastics. Mm-hmm. And cassava produces a very, very valuable source of raw material for this type of product.
All right, so because again, actually it's a good thing that you've brought in those products that you currently have, but the question is, what is the missing link? Is it the investment? Is it the knowledge? Why do we have such a huge disconnect, particularly at a time when the entire globe seems to be going towards a lot of environmental conservation, a lot of making sure that we use biodegradable materials?
Yes, I think so. There's partly the imbalance between the supply and the demand of cassava. Mm-hmm. So yields in Kenya of cassava are quite low. On average, actually throughout Africa, the yields are about 10 tons per hectare. But yet, in Asia, they're getting 23 tons per hectare. hectare on average. And actually the new varieties we have can produce up to 40 tons per hectare. But then again, there needs to be the market ready to offtake that cassava and actually use it.
All right, because again, the big concern at the moment is the fact that we're looking at drought resistant, if it's food crops, whether it's cash crops, we're looking at a lot of that resistance, whether it's weather resistance, whether it's growing with very minimal rainfall. So in terms of what are some of these offerings that Cassava brings to the table, so that when you go out to try and convince farmers that this is the way to go, what are some of the costs that they're cutting down?
So yes, cassava is naturally very drought tolerant. It needs a bit of rainfall to get established, but once it's established in the field, it can actually survive quite a long time under very extreme temperatures, high temperatures, and with low rainfall. And then and sometimes it'll lose its leaves, but when the rain comes, it'll sprout back up. And it'll give you a yield even when other crops such as maize won't yield. That's why people have traditionally been using it as a food security crop.
All right, so again, there's a question that we're seeing this, and particularly within the agriculture sector, and it's a big conversation at the moment. That is the question of value chain addition in terms of, apart from just growing these food crops and getting the food that we want, what else can we get out of some of these crops? You've talked about some of those biodegradable materials that offer an alternative to plastic, but what more can we get from this cassava plant?
So I think, yes, it can be used as I think the flour, the high quality cassava flour is huge, and there's a massive market for that. And it can also be mixed with like sorghum and millets as a very healthy alternative to your conventional maize. But it can also be used, as I said, as a source of starch. And starch is used in all sorts of industries, from canned foods to things like chipboard. All these different things use starch. So it's a very important raw material. It can also be used as a bioethanol, as a fuel, a clean cooking fuel. So there's a huge range of opportunities for cassava, not just eaten as a boiled, cooked root.
And I'm sure even for some of the farmers that are currently watching the show, one of the questions that they would want to know is, do we have demand for it?
I think this is what we need to go do, and this is partly what the National Cassava Conference and Expo is doing, is trying to bring different actors across the value chain together. So we have seed producers together with off-takers, together with processors and manufacturers, so we can build up the value chain together. And only in that way will we be able to get the balance right.
All right, let me take you back, Dr. There's the question of, okay, so I have these seedlings, I go and plant them. How long before maturity?
So yes, I mean, you normally plant cassava in stakes, about 20 or 30 centimeter stakes, rather than conventional seed. And it'll take actually about a year, about between 10 to 12 months to reap your yield.
All right, so in your own assessment, do you feel that the lack of technology, particularly in as far as cassava growing goes, do you feel that there's a lack of access to some of these new technologies that maybe would have enhanced the output that we're currently doing as a country?
I think one of the important things is access to clean seed, because one of the things that the main reason why the yield is not what it should be is virus diseases. And because you plant cassava as a stake, it's a vegetative material, very much the same as like a sweet potato vine. Yeah. And if it's infected with the virus, then the virus gets transmitted from year to year to year, and it can build up in the plant, and that has increasingly detrimental effect on the yield. The yield just goes down and down. So there's two important things to do. One is to get hold of improved varieties, and that's something that we're doing. We're working on getting improved varieties from IATA's breeding program, but also other breeding programs in the country that are resistant to these 2 virus diseases. And then also rapidly propagating virus-free planting material and distributing those through SMEs and cassava seed entrepreneurs to farmers. So what we're wanting to do is really set up a commercial seed system for cassava.
Yeah, because again, Dr. there's the question of if then there's this issue of viruses, how do we address them? How do we have the capacity to be able to say that this research institution is coming up maybe with the required with the required sprays, let's say, just to make sure that we mitigate against some of these risks?
Yes, so we have over the last 20 years, actually, I've been working with cassava breeding, and we have bred some very nice new cassava varieties that we have now introduced into Kenya, and we need to test those and look at the yields and the virus resistance in different environments in Kenya. So we're currently setting up trials in 4 counties in Kenya, and also down at the coast at Mtwapa, and then also we're trying out Taita Taveta as well. So I think those new varieties, we have to get them officially released. So we're doing these trials in collaboration with KEFIS, the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, and they are the regulators on plant health and have to approve to say whether a variety is good enough for the farmers to grow. So we're testing those.
Okay, and so just to be able to understand from some of the research that you've been able to conduct, I'm sure there's the question of the environment where these plants are grown, and where do you find that currently in Kenya, if we were to grow cassava in this region, maybe we would have the highest yields we've ever seen?
Yes, I think that the yields would improve dramatically. And I think, you know, not all varieties do well in all locations. So we have to, this is partly why we're doing the testing, to understand which varieties we need to recommend for which locations. So there'll be some that do well in Busia and Homa Bay and Migori, and there'll be others that do better down at the coast, in Kwale and Kilifi. So that's partly why we're doing these experiments.
All right, I'm sure for any regular farmer, the biggest concern that you have particularly is on the question of input. How much do you have to spend, be it on fertilizer, be it on preparation of this land? How much does it cost to be able to say that I have given this cassava the optimal environment for it to give me optimal yields?
So, yes, so your soil needs to have a little bit of organic matter, but it doesn't need too much. It doesn't need to be too rich. But it needs a certain amount of organic matter, and then a small amount of fertilizer. It doesn't need huge amounts of fertilizer. And then again, as I said, you don't need pesticides. We don't use pesticides or herbicides. So one of the main costs, I think, is possibly in weeding. Planting and weeding is the main input.
All right, can we talk about the commercial viability of this crop? Because at the same time, people are trying to earn a living in one way or another. Even for maize farmers, they're looking at the end of the day, I need to be able to take my maize to NCPB. So for cassava farmers, what is the commercial viability?
I think there's tremendous, tremendous opportunity. Basically, the cassava needs to be harvested, and then it needs to be peeled and chipped and dried in like screen houses, or just out in the sunshine. But this is where we really need some investment from investors, because there are numerous machines that can be used. You can do it on a very basic level, but then there are a large number of machinery that can be used for harvesting, for peeling, for chipping. You can get solar dryers. So as you ramp up the scale, then these these other bits of equipment become much more useful and viable.
All right, so I know we are fast running out of time, but I just want you to indulge me for a few more minutes and just to be able to understand this. At what point then do we plug in the private sector? At what point do we plug in the SME sector?
So we're actually working with the private sector even on the seed system. So we have some seed companies, one in each of 4 counties, that we are working with to produce clean seed of good varieties, who are then going to distribute those to cassava seed entrepreneurs, who can then take it further and distribute those to farmers. So the private sector can get involved right from the beginning. But the private sector can also be off-takers of the cassava. They can be involved with the drying of the cassava, the chipping, the peeling, and then the processing, whether it is in, we need the millers to be involved, we need the bakers to be involved, incorporating it, and they can be seeing what they can be producing with the cassava flour.
All right, so because I know one of the questions that then a lot of our viewers might want also to be answered is the question of why should I come to this expo? Why is this conversation an important one for me as a farmer?
So I think the real value of this expo is really to showcase throughout the value chain, from the seed production right up through the manufacturing process, the off-takers, and up to the processing and even the export side. And really we're sharing across the value chain. And we're really networking together, so it's a great opportunity to make contacts, to stimulate the conversation, and to see how we can take cassava from being really a very traditional crop to being a crop of the modern world. It's climate resilient, it's good for bioplastics, for bioethanol, against fossil fuels. So it's really a crop for the future.
All right, so because again, for some of these millers that you talk about, I'm sure the conventional millers that Kenyans know are ule wa kisiagi, that's a maize miller. So the question is, how many cassava millers do we have in the country? And also, even as you talk us through that, maybe you can also help us understand, are there charges to be part of this expo?
So yeah, as far as charges with the expo, no, it's free. Anybody is welcome, but we do ask people to register online. So your name is at the gate for entry. As far as the millers are concerned, I think I'm not a miller myself. I don't know much about it, but I think the same machinery can be used, and the same type of technology can be used for milling cassava chips, dried cassava chips, as it is for maize or other cereals such as sorghum and millet.
All right, Dr. There's the question of, in terms of areas for potential investment, apart from just growing and investing in the agriculture aspect of it, what are the other sectors that you feel a lot of investments need to be directed and channeled towards?
I think, yes, incorporating the flour, high quality cassava flour. You really need to focus on getting, and as it comes out of the field, actually keeping it safe and healthy and processing it in hygienic ways, so you get really high quality cassava flour. Then obviously the milling and into the bakery industries. We can also invest in technologies such as your biodegradable packaging, which is a tremendous opportunity as well.
All right, so because again, I know that you're currently working with the likes of Calro. Maybe you can help us understand what kind of research are you currently conducting towards as far as cassava goes, and also what are some of the other things that maybe Kenyans need to be looking out for in the coming days?
So one thing that is quite challenging with cassava is the multiplication rate of the seed. So you know, when you have a maize plant, you can actually get like 80 seeds from one cob of maize.
Okay.
And that you can do that about twice a year. But with cassava, you grow a plant up for about a year and you can get 8 seeds from it. So it's very, very small. So we've been working on rapid propagation technologies of virus-free plants of good varieties. So I don't know whether you can see, but I've actually got some here. This is what we call semi-autotrophic hydroponics.
Okay.
And these are cassava plantlets produced at Culro in Muguga. This is actually a proprietary technology, but Culro have purchased the license. And so we are rolling this technology out in Muguga, in Njoro, hopefully in Matwapa as well.
Yeah.
And there's a number of other technologies that we are using to really rapidly propagate cassava. So what the public need to be looking out for is clean, virus-free planting material from a recognized supplier of good varieties.
All right, Dr. Ari, thanks so much for making time to speak to us. And of course, I think that's a good place to end it. We'll be looking forward to see what are some of the things that definitely come out of this convention, just to be able to inform our viewers, just to help them understand what are some of the offerings that they can currently invest in if they have not invested in yet. Thank you so much, our viewers, for making time to stay with us during this show. Of course, Mbiu ya KTN is up next.